Are there healthy ways of coping with the loss of a loved one or also loss of something you love? That's the question we will be answering in the next 1 hour during the show. Talk to us. You can call us live. The number will be displayed right at the bottom of your screen, or talk to us on Twitter at Ebru TV Kenya and also at Purity_Museo. Use the hashtag #MyDoctor. And now help me welcome our special guest to the show, Dr. Stephen Wahome. Thank you so much for making time for us.
Thank you.
Yes, we are psychologists in that matter, and we're talking about grief and loss, grieving and losing. There's so much that happens when we lose our loved ones, but first let's just begin by telling us what exactly is a grief or even a loss. How do you define it?
Thank you, and thank you again for coming into this show. Loss and grief. I think when we talk about a loss, we are talking about a situation in which you have lost something very valuable to you, and which affects you in a deeper emotional way, in which coping with life becomes very, very difficult without that which you have lost. And especially when you talk about loss of a dear person, it seems like life beyond that level where you live to this person that you love to very much, it becomes very, very difficult for you.
Right.
So loss basically is an aspect where the person or what that which you valued so much is no longer with you, and you have no ability to get it back. Grief is basically a reaction to the loss. It's basically what you call a deeper reaction to a loss, especially of somebody that you loved so much, or probably even you can say of something you loved so much. And as a result, you find life very difficult to cope without it. So when we are talking about grief, we are talking about a profound reaction to a loss that you have gone through, that which affects your life, both emotionally, both in terms of thought process, and both in terms of behavior. Right. So when you talk about grief, we are talking about somebody who have gone through a very deeper loss that he finds difficult emotionally to cope with.
Yeah, and you said it could be, for the loss, it could be loss of someone who is dear to you, or also something that is as well dear to you. So how does it affect us psychologically?
I think we have to look at the hierarchy of what have you lost. In most cases of grief reaction, we talk about somebody who have lost a dear one. And when you talk about a dear person, it may not necessarily mean somebody, mother, child, or father. It seems somebody who was so meaningful to your life. And this person has died, or this person is, has passed on, and then you're talking about in terms of grief. But realize the losses are many types. We have things that we lose that we can grieve over, but not significant as we grieve over the loss of somebody. There are people who have had employment, and they have lost a very dear job. So sometimes they grieve. Then there are people who have lost their parents, there are people who have lost their dear ones. That grief is also different. And you tend to find out they pick a different nature. So depending on what loss you are talking about, then you can talk about grief being related to that particular loss. So when you talk about grief to a loss of a dear one, sometimes it's very emotional, because what we are saying is that life seems to have been certain up to a certain point. And when this person goes away, or this person dies, it seems that life is completely distorted. Life has been disturbed. So coping with that absence of this particular person becomes quite painful. And when you talk about a person who have lost to, there are three things that we look into. Number one, what is your relationship with the person that you have lost? And that's why we mourn differently. We grieve differently, rather, because depending on who have you lost. The closer you are to the person, the more attached you are to the person, the more the grief reaction. So that means the relationship between the person who have died and the person who is living is crucial to understanding grief. The second thing is that what is the circumstance of the person who have lost the person? Does it mean that it's a child, whoever it is, are you able to cope? What are your social skills? So if you're a person who is so vulnerable, depending on this person's survival, then the loss and the grief again is different. Then the other thing is that what were you going through at that particular time? It doesn't mean that when we are losing dear ones, we are already vacant. We already haven't, not going through loss. But you find that there are people who have gone through multiple losses. Maybe you lost somebody the other day, you lost somebody the other day, and this one happens again. Again, that can also be. So the social circumstance of the survivor or the person who have lost somebody, and of course the state you are in. And then the last one is the nature of the loss. How did you lose this person? Sometimes you find out we grieve, especially when the death or probably the person you have lost is uncertain. It was not foreseen. There was no preparation at all. So when it comes like that, it strikes, it's traumatic, then you find the grief is likely to prolong for a period of time. Right. So those factors are so important to understanding grief so that you can understand what is happening. And the last one I want to mention is also the circumstance that I've mentioned earlier on of the person who is experiencing the loss. Is it a child? Is it an adult? How are they related? All those matters would determine how do we grieve when somebody has gone. Yes.
And on our show today, we're talking matters grief and loss. How do you cope with the loss of a loved one or even the loss of something that is so dear to you? How do you manage someone who is going through grieving? And also, are there healthy ways to grieve? Talk to us. The call line is displayed right at the bottom of your screen. Use the hashtag MyDoctor on Twitter at Ebru TV Kenya, at Purity_Museo, or talk to us on Facebook, Ebru TV Kenya, or Purity Museo. We do have Dr. Stephen Wahome, who is a psychologist, just helping us understand how there are healthy way to grieve loss of a loved one. And Doc, you've talked about some of the causes or reasons, factors that may contribute or may affect or even affect how one is going to grieve the loss of a loved one. But so do you mean that people should be allowed to grieve? Is it healthy in the first place?
Well, it is very healthy. It is important to allow people to grieve. I know sometimes people think that when you grieve, you look out of version. But I can assure you that some of the mental conditions that we have seen that develops with people who have not grieved enough are enormous when we talk about grief. Now, the way to grieve differs from person to person. And sometimes it's also determined by culture, because you realize that in certain cultures, there are a way in which people grieve. There is a way in which people mourn. Because when we are grieving, basically the overt actions we are seeing is an aspect of mourning. So people mourn differently, people grieve differently. And there are people who do it overtly. They cry, they shout. And until they have gone through that process of shouting and crying, then they don't feel good. And you see, when we are grieving and when we are going through the process, it's that we are kind of going through a catharsis. We are kind of going through a process in which we get in touch with the reality of what is going on. So should people allowed to grieve? Yes, they should be allowed, and they should grieve in the way they know best. And basically you find out, usually we copy what we have seen other people doing, or what our culture determines, or where we are. There are some people who would break down, there are some people who prostrate on the ground, there are people who cry, there are people who would actually yell. There are many ways in which people react to a loss. And that process of all that particular problem of process of mourning and all that is basically what we call grief. So people should be allowed to grieve, because grieving is a way in which we emotionally get in touch with our own reality and tend to register the loss so that we can be able to know, yes, this is the reality. Where people have not grieved and they have kind of used a defense mechanism in which they have suppressed the grief process, then sometimes it can come later on. And that's why we have different types of grief, where you find out somebody is actually grieving now, the loss is current, he goes through all the process. And then the grief is also accompanied by rituals and ceremonies that help people register the reality. So when people are grieving, either you'll find out they participate also in the funeral rites, they participate in all activities of trying to register these activities. That process, then we say people should be around. Otherwise, when you see people, I've seen this in occasions whereby we are in a funeral, then somebody goes to view the body, and then somebody breaks down, and you find people are struggling to tell them, don't do it, don't do it. Let people get in touch with the reality. Because at that point in time, they are registering the loss in their mind. And if they don't do that and suppress it, then it later come later to haunt them. And that's why we have had what we call post-grief reaction. Or another condition we call dread grief reaction, where you find out somebody died, you became numb, you did not register it, you did not mourn, you looked very courageous. People said you are very strong. But 2 months, 2 years, 6 months, 3 months, 1 month, a few weeks after, then you find you are now breaking down and grieving at that point as if the actual loss is happening at that particular period of time. Because at that point in time, you're numbed. So it is healthy. It is important to allow people to grieve, because the moment they go through that discomfort, they will be relieved and they'll be better. I think what is basically the problem is the people who allow these people. You may look at the person and feel maybe it's inappropriate to cry loudly. Maybe it's inappropriate to do this. But that's what that person feels like, and that's what is going on. The only thing you need to do if you are holding such a person, you are next to the person, make sure he doesn't hurt himself, make sure he doesn't fall in a way that he can be hurt. Let him sit in a comfortable place, let him cry, let her cry, let her go through this process, and later on, they will calm down and they tend to register the reality. Once they go through that deep emotional reaction, then they are getting in touch with the reality. But if you deny them that opportunity, then it will later come to haunt them at a later point.
And Doc, still staying with the ways to grieve, do we have the acceptable ways to grieve? And when do you say now, I think now this grief now is becoming a problem? Do we have acceptable and non-acceptable ways to grieve? Which ones do you say it's okay for someone who's lost a loved one? You can do 1, 2, 3, and 4. And which one can you say, I think when you go over this, or this is overboard, and also it can cause some health complications? How do you categorize them? Is there a way?
Thank you very much. I think when we talk about grief, we cannot say this is the best way to do it, or this is the period that you do it. The period sometimes is determined by a number of factors. You realize that when we lose somebody who is dear to us, the grief process have stages. One, there is the feeling of loss. And when people feel the loss, there are people who become numb. They don't register it. We shall go through the steps of grief later on. And as a result of that, once that has taken place and they have registered this loss, there's always a final ceremony in the sense that they are getting to deal with the reality. And that's where funerals and other things would come in, especially if you're talking about death. And when they participate in these funerals, it is important for them to go through the full ritual depending on how cultured, because sometimes grief is determined by the cultural practice. So you find out people go through a certain process until the person is buried, and after that there's ceremony. In some cultures, the mourning period would even extend beyond the funeral day. And they have another month, they have another ceremony. And all these things were there to help people register the loss. There are places where somebody would die, then tomorrow is buried, and the people go on in life. But it's to experience this kind of thing. So I would not say that this is the period you are supposed to grieve in terms of 2 weeks, 1 week, and all those kind of things. But then there's also the period where after the whole process of mourning is over, even what you do in your culture is over, you still have these things hunting you back again. And to the point that it prevents you from functioning, in the sense that you are no longer able to sleep, you are not, and this is post the ceremonies are over, you have already finished what you would call the official mourning period, or the period in which you actually mourn in where you live. And then beyond that, you are not able to go back to work, you are not able to do your normal activities, you are not able to sleep, you are not able to eat, you are not able to relate with other people. Then at that point in time, then we can say the grief now is having serious symptoms on your functioning. And that's what you go, the way in which you function, gap. So when your functioning becomes incapacitated by the loss that you went through, by the grief where you are going through, then we can now say there's a problem. And that's why we say that somebody requires help, somebody requires to go through it. But if it is within the period of where normally, depending on where you live, people go through this period of mourning and all that, and you're finished and you're able to run back to your normal life, then we have no issue with that. But when it has gone beyond the normal period of time, and then it significantly now affect your functioning, then we can now say there is what we call a grief reaction or a delayed grief reaction. In other words, you are going through the same process as if it is being reenacted, as if it's happening again. Then now we now say that it has a psychological and health effect on your life. And that way now you require an intervention. Yes.
And Doc, are there early signs? Are there signs for someone who is grieving? How do you identify? How is it possible for me to identify that I think my friend is going through 1, 2, 3, and 4? Do we have signs for that?
Well, it would require for you to do what you call an assessment to find out why is somebody behaving this way. Now, there are what you call overt behaviors and some or others that are not overt. In the sense, you may find out that somebody continues in a ritual that sustains the grief. Let's say somebody has lost a dear person, and the whole process have gone on, he have gone through the funeral and all that. But you find out he's not able to leave home He spent all the time visiting the grave. Every day he's there. He's talking, he's praying, he's talking to this person who have been buried there. Or you find out he's not even able to function. He's not able to get out of the house. Any discussion you are talking is about the loss. And they tend to break down as well. When they narrate this story, they are breaking down. And this goes on for a prolonged period of time. Then you say, and they tell you, I'm not able to come to work. Or when I go to that room, he comes back. He's talking to me. I have these strange dreams. I can't function. He becomes fearful. He can't stay on his own. All these are symptoms to say that there is a reaction to the grief. And that's why sometimes somebody will require the help. So one of the things that you observe is that, is there any behavior that this person engage to, either to continue mourning or to continue in the process of assuming this person is there, or is he also nabbing in the sense that he behaves like the person is around? You find out maybe you lost a dear person, but you're still saying, I met him yesterday, or we talked to him yesterday. You are talking as if this person is still alive, as if this person has not gone. So you find out you are so preoccupied with that. Then that's with it is an unhealthy coping. Sometimes it is normal for you to lose a dear person, and then in some few days after the funeral, during period of time, to dream with this person. It is very normal. Some people get very scared and say, I'm dreaming. There's nothing wrong with them dreaming. Because dreaming is basically brought by three things. One, things that you have dreaded most, or things that you fear most. Then things that you anticipate to happen, or the experience that you have had. This person you have lost, you have had a lot of experience with this person. You have shared together, you have sat together. So it is likely that you will come in the dream for some time. But as time goes, the dream vividness keeps on fading. And you find out the dreams tend to reduce. But during this period of time, then the dreams come. But if these dreams are accompanied by nightmares, in the sense they wake up, they scream, especially common with children, then that we say that then the grief is affecting them in a certain way. So we say that they are unhealthy coping. Then the other thing is you find out that they were supposed to resume their normal duties. You used to work, you can't go. Anytime you are told to go to work, you are breaking, you are mourning, and you are not even talking about it. It's a no-go on subject. You don't want to discuss. Some people even avoid to see photographs or anything like that, and they say, leave me alone. They don't want to talk about it. Then you also start finding yourself isolating yourself in the period, in the place of work. Maybe after that particular event, you're not able to sleep. You used to cooperate with the people, do things together. You are no longer doing that. You used to go to church. You no longer go to church. You seem to have changed drastically from a more normal behavior to this kind of a behavior people are not understanding. So when you see this kind of symptoms, it is important to sit down with these people and find out what is going on. Then sometimes they also have headaches that were not there before. They feel depressed. They are no longer happy. They seem to have permanent sadness. These symptoms are likely to tell you that this person could be going through something. But it is always important for the person to be seen by an appropriate person who can understand to treat this condition, because this could also be heralded by other things. Maybe a grief could come in when somebody was going through another process, and you may interpret that this person is grieving, but basically that's not what is happening. He could be going through another mental condition. So it is important that this person goes through a process of proper diagnosis so that we know, are we dealing with grief, are we dealing with profound depression, or are we dealing with something else that have been triggered by the loss this person have gone through.
Right. And now let's get to the stages of grieving. Do we have stages for grieving in the first place?
Well, many people have researched on this topic to find out how do people grieve, what are the stages of grief, and many people have come up with different stages. One of the popular psychologists of the time was called Kubler-Ross, and he talks about some stages. The first stage people go through when they hear bad news or loss, before even they start grieving, is what we call denial. Denial is one of the defense mechanisms in the ego that helps us to cope with something that is present. Where people say, no, it can't be true. I was talking to this person this morning, we are with this person there, it can't be true. There are people who stay at the denial stage and they nab. They nab, they don't feel anything. They tell you it is not true. And you may find them even participating in activities of that, but they still say it is not true.
But is it okay?
Yes.
Is it normal?
Temporarily it is okay. It is okay to have a denial. But when this denial prevents you from facing the reality, where you know this death has occurred, but you continue convincing yourself and using all means of justification to show them it is not true when it's actually true, means now you are denying the reality. So it's a mental reaction. It's a mental reaction in the sense you deny to save yourself from that acute grief or shock. But eventually the denial should give way to accept that the person has passed on.
So how do you accept, especially when it's someone is so dear to you and you do not want to think about
Actually,
it?
you don't accept immediately. The next thing you go after denial, and some people have stayed in denial. Some people even refuse to accept to go for funerals. They refuse to do anything. They say, I'm not going. That person is not gone. I believe it. I know it. And they feel it. They communicate in their mind. That denial can be a problem. Other people may proceed on from denial and go to the next stage they call anger. They are angry with everybody. And they keep on asking, why?
Before we get to anger, Doc, yes. How do you address the denial? How do you move on from denial now to accepting the reality and now putting yourself into the grieving process, hoping that you'll get over it?
There are many ways in handling the denial. One of the things is that that is where people need to register the reality. Initially, people say, I don't believe it. How do you deal with the denial? Number one, if you have lost a dear person and the person is still not believing, sometimes seeing makes the people believe. And that's why we encourage people who are going through grief and mourning that during the funeral ceremony, let them attend, let them be there. There's nothing wrong even seeing the person who have gone, because it is through that seeing that they register, and that tends to counteract the denial that is there. Are we together? So one of it is going through that experience. Do not encourage somebody, don't attend the funeral, don't do anything else, don't believe it is there. No, let the person face the reality. If he's not able to be physically there, sometimes people have used visual images to be able to see that this is actually true, this is took place. But remember, denial can be two types. There is that denial where you don't believe immediately, but later on you come to believe. It's just like a defense mechanism. And there's a denial where you numb. You become like you don't experience anything. You're still going through the process, but you're not feeling anything. And you have seen the occasions where people even have gone to funerals and people expect them to cry, but they don't cry. They say, I don't feel anything. They go through as if they're in a video. People talk about video. They're in a situation whereby they don't tend to register the reality because they have already gone to that kind of stage. These are the people later on who become affected by the same process when they face a reaction. Right. So the best thing is to let the person register the loss. Okay. Assist them.
Right. And when we come back, we continue with the stages for grieving. Grief and loss is a discussion today. Do not go anywhere, because we'll also be having a look at how do we take care of ourselves during grieving. Do not go anywhere. We are coming back in a short while. Welcome back to the second and the last part of the show. Call us live. We do have a clinical psychologist in studio, Dr. Wahome, who is helping us understand how to grieve and for a loss of a loved one or something that you love most. Are there healthy ways to go through the loss? And also, how do you identify someone who is also grieving? Are there stages for grieving? That is what we were talking about before we went for the break, and that's what we continue with. Call us live. The number is 0791 478 990 on Twitter at Ebru TV Kenya, at Purity_Museo, the hashtag My Doctor as usual. Let's see what we have prepared for you on our home remedy segment. Thank you for staying with us. My Doctor Show continues right now with Dr. Stephen Wahome, who is a clinical psychologist, just helping us understand how to grieve for the loss of a loved one in the right and healthy way. Welcome back, Doc.
Thank you.
Yes, we were still on the stages for grieving.
Yes.
We had already talked about denial.
Denial.
Yeah, maybe we can get to the next one.
Yes.
You said anger.
Yes, and just to tell you that people don't go in a line. Although we are going to mention in a line, there are people who may start other way around. But usually many people are going through denial. The next thing they go through is anger. They are angry, and they keep on asking, why me? Why am I experiencing this loss? Why did it come to a family? Why did it come to a section? Why did it come to this unit? Why this organization?
That's a bad question.
There's no answers, but people keep on asking themselves. And as a result of asking why, the why may be followed by what we call guilt. Sometimes you feel like you contributed to it. Did I do enough to save my friend? Did I save enough to save my husband, my wife? What did I do? And sometimes you come even to blame the institution. Could he have survived if I did not take him to this hospital, to this other hospital? Or if I did this, or if I did that, probably my person would have survived. So first of all is anger. And this anger can be directed at anybody. You can blame yourself, you can blame others, you blame the doctors, you blame the hospitals. You even say, I'll never go to that hospital again. You also blame God. Why are you doing this? I've been so faithful to you. I do ABCD, I participate in all activities. Why me? You could not, did they take care of me? You could not actually prevent me from going through this problem, or what we call in Christian, this cup, taking this cup. So you find out that stage lasts for it, and people become angry. Sometimes you may go to a place and you're telling somebody, poor, because you lost your wife, you lost your child, you lost your husband, you lost your friend, and they tell you, nime poor, or they just don't acknowledge it. They're angry. And this period of time can go in. And people even go even for litigations. They even go to court. They can even say, we are not barring until ABCD is that. They are angry. They are trying to understand why. Sometimes people have gone on a retaliation mission. You find that we lost our person, they are angry at that period, they go to retaliate. So this period may be marked by just anger. This anger can be externalized, it can be inside. To children, sometimes they feel guilty. They feel maybe if I was home, my dad would not have passed away. If I did ABCD, I did not. So this is a period where people are angry with themselves, they are angry with the environment, they are angry with the reality. And that's why when somebody have lost somebody, even when you go there, because you don't know where they are, sometimes not even telling many things can make a difference. Just being there. You may not even say much. Just say, I've come to be with you because you're experiencing this and we are sorry about it. Being there. Because sometimes people have gone and tell them, no, they don't worry, the person is in heaven, the person is where. People say, children would ask, why does so-and-so, daddy or mommy have to leave us and go to heaven? Who are we left with? So at that point in time, it's necessary to allow people to go through this process. And how do they go about it? They express it. And that's why sometimes you ask people what happened. They narrate the story. And the more they talk about it, the more they tend to get in touch with the reality. It's a process people go through. And this anger level would subside with the time. But it may not go, people come back. They may start with the denial, come back. So it keeps on fluctuating.
And Doc, what happens if the pain will just not go away, if the feeling of anger will just not go away? Let's say it's an institution, maybe you were fired, or it's a relationship that has broken up, and what happens, and you think someone is responsible for that, and you'll just not forgive that person. How do you first, to begin with, forgive such a person who's caused so much pain to your life?
Remember, any psychological harm done, sometimes it is very difficult to undo it as if it never happened. What we do is try to make it less harmful to this particular person. And so the most important thing is that when this person is growing this anger, allow them to verbalize their anger. We know when people are angry and they are allowed to talk in an atmosphere of care without condemnation, they tend to ease down. Even you, when you have disagreed with somebody and is angry at you, and the other person is angry at you, what will make you be at peace is to be around to go through catharsis, to empty yourself up, to talk about what you are feeling, and then calm down. So do not tell them what they are saying. Allow them That is why in some communities, people grieve roundly, angry. They say things. If you listen to their mother tongue, they are saying many things. But later on, they come and say, oh, they come and rest down. So anger stage, the best way to do with it is let the person verbalize it. If you have a caring person or somebody who can provide counseling, sit down with this person, let him talk about it. Listen to them. Don't judge them. Don't condemn them. And you can go around and ask, now that it has happened, what are you going to do? Yes, you may be very angry. You may be angry with yourself. You may be angry with the husband. You may be angry with God. But this is the reality. How do you proceed from there? Eventually, the anger doesn't last for long. It lasts for a brief period of time, and you find out from that particular period of time, somebody may go to another stage. If it is a question of, let's say, terminal illness, you have been diagnosed with a terminal condition, and you feel that you are grieving over it, you have this condition, you feel like you are dying. Sometimes you are even anticipating the death and saying, now this is my death day, and you find people in this kind of thing, and you are angry. Why did I get this infection? Why did I get this disease? All this kind of thing. Allow people to talk about that. And then you may find out, especially, let's talk about terminal condition, or let's talk about the news you have talked about of a relationship that have died, that has ended. So once they go through this anger stage, sometimes they may enter into the third stage. We call it a bargaining stage, where they feel, maybe I should have done this. Maybe if I do this, I'll live. And you have seen people in the terminal condition say, maybe I'm ready to even build a church to God so that he can save my situation. They are bargaining in themselves. Maybe I need to do this to live. Maybe I need to do this to live. And the same case you may find out, even people who have lost dear ones. Maybe if I do A, B, C, D, this way, the loss will not be big.
That's where guilt comes in.
Yes, and they, through this process of bargaining, anger actually brings a guilt because you steal it. But the resolution of anger, people go to that stage where they are bargaining. They are trying to say, what can I do to prevent this? And they are ready to go through so many issues. And that's why we allow them. Issues and mourning are part of the process. And it helps people to register the loss. The same case with somebody with a terminal condition. They go through this. But eventually, remember bargaining and anger and denial, you haven't dealt with the reality yet. So sometimes after that stage, they may sink to fourth stage. And the fourth stage we call depression. And this is where it may not be clinical depression, where we can say this person suffered from a certain illness before, but they just become depressed. They become very sad. They become very withdrawn. They start crying. They refuse to feed. You get the point? Sleep becomes difficult. And at that point, you find out they don't want to talk. This is the time you hear people telling, leave me alone.
But Doc, at what point does grief become depression? Because there are some people who, when they are in pain, they will not eat, they will not, even sleeping will be a problem. Yes. Would you say that's the process or journey to depression, or is it also a way of expressing your loss?
Let's put it this way. There's what you call depressive thought, or being depressed, but not necessarily having the clinical manifestation of depression. And this would come in, especially when people are mourning. But the actual illness we call depression that may come in as a result of many other factors, not necessarily grief. Can grief cause depression? Yes, it can cause if it is not well resolved. But this temporary state of depression, of feeling sad and feeling unhappy, is different. The clinical definition of depression is a condition or illness which is characterized by something we call hedonia, or lack of interest in anything, and remaining sad all through, into the point that somebody is not able to function normally. And that's what you talk about depression. But this depression we are talking about, when somebody is going through mourning, could be a brief period that occurs within a period of time. And as that person goes through this process, he comes out of it. So it may stick and become actual depression, or it may be a depressive condition arising out of the fact that I'm going through a loss. So that is the difference here we have. If somebody does not resolve that particular problem at that period in time, then eventually this person, you may get to be diagnosed with depression, which you lose as a result of going through unsatisfactory with grief. So grief can cause depression. But there's a depressive phase within grief which may not require necessarily any treatment, but just require the normal process of counseling, and somebody goes through it. Take an example. Somebody have lost a dear one. He has been very busy in the preparation and all that. But during the time of the funeral and all this, they come to register the reality. And you find they are very much affected on this particular day. They are crying, they are sad, they are withdrawn and all that. So these are the symptoms you are likely to see. And this will last for a shorter period of time. As they come through the process, as they go through it, they get out of it. Most naturally, people will get out of this. Where they are affected, they will need somebody. And that is why we need people around us when we are going through this difficult period, because people need people they can lay their shoulder on, they can share. And the more they talk about this anger, the more they talk about the loss, the more they get to deal with this category reality. The biggest problem is when they repress it. They say, I don't feel anything, I am okay, I am okay, I am okay. When you suppress and you don't want it to come out, that's now where depression will come in.
And Doc, what happens when the feeling of pain is now suicidal?
Now, that again is a little bit further, because that also sees now there is a depression has come in. And depression, when you talk about depression, what are the characteristics? One, the person is constantly sad because he's not happy at all. Depressed people are usually very sad. They are unhappy. They are full of negativity. And they don't see like there is life beyond this particular circumstance that I'm in. And that is why sometimes even in some ancient communities, they actually used to die, especially with the big leaders and kings. They used to say, I can't be left alone. I'm going to die with the person. And people have done that. When they are doing that, they are not in their normal sense of reality, unless it was culturally done in those days. But in normal reaction where you feel like people want to die with the person, people want to be buried, and you have seen people jumping into the grave, isn't it, as the body is lowered, that means people are not themselves. At that point, they are depressed, they are out of their normal sense of reality, and they need to be calmed down. Because when the person comes back to reality, and he's much better, then he can be able to understand this is just basically a reaction towards the loss. Okay. And as I said earlier, it depends on the person who have, how were you related? How strong was the connection? And second, who are you who is mourning to this particular person? Because the relationship is actually what affects the grief reaction. The strong and more emotional you are, and the bond between you and the person who have passed on, the more effect it will have on you.
Yeah, and Doc, allow me to cut you short. We have someone who's calling us from Nakuru. All Maybe we can listen to what they have to say. Hello?
Hi.
Hello, hi.
I'm Olga calling from Nakuru.
Okay.
I have a question for the doctor.
Right, go ahead.
I don't know how I should put it, but I think the stages he's mentioning, I have gone through them all. After losing my dad, I had lots of things on my mind to do. How can someone, the depression stage, how can someone go about it?
Okay.
If you are either clinically depressed, what's your first stage? What could you do?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we've not talked about this, how to cope with the grief.
Yes, we haven't reached there, but it's a good question. If I got her clearly, she said that she has lost her dad. And she's asking whether it's a clinical depression or anything. I did not understand whether she's going through that currently or it has happened.
She's gone through all the stages.
She has gone through all the stages, and she's doing that. Then she needs help. And what we mean by she needs help, she needs to go through the process of a counseling. And sometimes, if it doesn't alleviate the problem, she needs to go through a psychological assessment to find out two things. One, was there depression earlier on before the father died, which was not manifest, that was triggered by the loss of the father? That is one point that is in time. Because there are people who are vulnerable to the point that the loss of the dad would actually trigger what was there, that would have come in maybe much later on, or people are vulnerable. Two, did this depression, was it caused by the loss of the dad? And if it is the loss of the dad, then go through the process to find out what are the sustaining factors of this depression. What are the things that make her feel what she feels? Is it about the responsibility that is being left around? Is it about the sense of loss that has been left around? And what are you going to do? So she needs to go through this process so that you can discuss, now that dad has gone and dad is not coming back, what are you going to cope with the process? What is it that you never went through? Did she participate in all the issue processes? Did she actually participate in the funeral? Was she at one point numb in the sense that she did not go through these experiences? So what is important for such a person, I would advise, is basically to be able to go to a clinic and to see the appropriate person, especially the people who are mental health, and find out, why do I feel that way? You can see a psychiatrist or a psychologist and find out, why do I feel the way I feel? Long after the funeral of my dad, after the loss, what is it that I find difficult to cope with? Is it his absence? Or is it the responsibility? Or is this a stress factor brought by his absence? Because you realize that when we lose our dear ones, a lot of things do arise. The family disintegrates, conflicts do arise, and as soon as these things come in, they can trigger depression because you become overwhelmed to deal with this particular process. And you start thinking and imagining that if dad was there, these things would not have come. I would have dealt with them. And if you are also going through other processes, it doesn't mean, as I mentioned earlier on, that because you have lost somebody, you are vacant of other problem. Maybe this person was also going through other issues unrelated to death. And now death has come, and this issue have triggered. So there are many combinations, there are many factors that can be combined here to bring about a clinical depression.
Okay.
So if it is so severe that is making her unable to function, then depression has also what you call the biochemical processes. There are some chemicals in the brain that need also to be interfered with, to be manipulated, and that's why we push people on what you call antidepressant. And with antidepressant and with some psychotherapy services, this patient usually recover from this particular problem.
Okay. And Doc, we have two more questions to answer. One, other than depression, do we have other health implications that come with uncontrolled grief? And also now, how do we manage, or how do we take care of someone who is grieving? How do we take care of ourselves, our health in the first place when we are grieving? Maybe you can answer that.
Probably we can answer that question. Maybe we need to talk about the one more stage that we left out on the grief process. Then we come to the question that you have asked.
Okay.
We talked about this person goes through depressive stage, and that's why I've said depression can be temporary. It can be through simple counseling or talking to people, alleviate itself. Sometimes it can stick and become what we call clinical depression. Then after that, people go through the process we call acceptance, where now they have accepted the reality and they are able to cope. They say, dad is gone, it's a cross chapter, I have to move on. And that's why we encourage people to participate in all the rituals to help them accept. Participate in the funeral, participate in the viewing of the body, participate in the wreathing, participate in all those meetings, all these other things that help you. So that as you go back even to entertain denial, the reality on the ground tells you, no, it can't be denied anymore. The fact has happened, and people tend to accept. And then people start to ask, where do I move from here? Because in a way or the other, we all will have to experience a loss or a grief one way or the other. How do you move from here? And I think that's the question you're asking.
Right.
Now, do those stages go in a line? No. Sometimes you may find out somebody have accepted. Then something comes up, and then somebody's in an anger, goes back to anger stage again. Why did that die? What did they do? So you can see some people stuck there and fluctuating between acceptance, sometimes between denial, sometimes between anger. When somebody is stuck in those areas, then we say now the grief is affecting them. And that's why they need to go through a process of counseling so that they can be able to verbalize these issues and think them over. Now, this is the question you have just asked me.
Yes. Do we have other health complications that come with uncontrolled grief other than depression?
Correct. Now, there are two other things we can talk about. One, remember, grief or loss can also trigger what you call an anxiety disorder. An anxiety disorder, if the death was so tragic, it happened, it can trigger something we call post-traumatic stress disorder. People who have gone through an experience where probably with a loved person, you survived, the person died, and you also look at yourself and say, I survived death by a whisker. Then you find out not only are you mourning the loss of the person you are with, but you also went through an experience that you are not able to deal with. And that's what you call a PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. So it comes in, and that's also could be a herald for also depression. So that can come in. The other one that can come in is what you call anxiety disorders or reactive stress disorder, where you find out that this person experienced so much anxiety as a result of loss to the point that he's not able to function. He may not be depressed, but any mention of the father or any mention of the mother or whoever it is that passed on creates another feeling that they become anxious, they become less stressed, they start experiencing palpitation, they tell you have a headache, I cannot sleep, and that becomes a problem, especially to children. They can also experience something we call panic disorders. You find out any time they see a photo of their father, or anytime somebody mentioned, they get to a panic mode. Sometimes they get what we call somatoform disorders, where they may fall, they may have this reaction. And when we tend to discuss with them, when we tend to analyze them, then we find out probably there's a profound grief reaction that they are not dealt with. So it can be manifested through a number of conditions. Now, finally, when you get this kind of anxiety, when you get depressed, when you get this kind of condition, now it can trigger physiological condition. You find out you used to eat, you're not able to eat, or you are now overeating, because there's also the opposite of it. Some people tend to seek refuge through overfeeding. And now you find out probably you had an existing sugar levels problem. Now we are telling about we see also now there's a diabetes or a condition that's arising out of that. So depression can trigger many other things, because it tells you don't eat, don't meet people, don't do this. Sometimes you may even think people are so depressed they even think of dying. They think of killing themselves.
And so, Doc, just help us now move on. How do you move on from such a grief? You know, it doesn't, maybe it's a loss of someone or loss of something that is dear to you. How do you move on? How do you accept? How do you even take care of yourself during grieving?
Can I say sometimes nobody's an expert sometimes when it comes to individual reaction.
Right.
Even the people who have a lot of knowledge, they find themselves in that kind of a mix. The best thing I would say when you are very sane like we are now is to say, understand loss will come either way. And the first thing we deal with the loss is to assess it and accept that it has happened. That is the most difficult part of it. So what is it that you need to do? We talk about what we call coping mechanism. And with the coping mechanism, there's something we call active behavior coping and emotional coping. What is active behavior coping?
Yes, and look, I'll cut you short once again.
Okay.
We'll continue shortly. We have
Yes.
someone from Kasarani. Hello.
Hello.
Hello, hi.
Hi.
Talk to us.
Okay, I'm asking, what can someone do after going some grief, then you have anxiety all throughout the time? As in, you say that, hello?
Just reduce the volume of your TV. We can get you from our side.
Oh, okay. I was asking,
Try reducing the volume of your TV kindly. Okay, continue. I think we've lost the caller, but they're going to call back.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't get the question. I think
I think
there
she's
was a
going
lot
to
of
call back. Yeah,
interference.
she's
Yes.
going to call back.
Okay. So what were you discussing
The
before?
coping mechanism.
The coping mechanism.
Yeah.
I talked about active behavior coping, and actually there are three: active behavior coping, and cognitive about the mind, and that is emotional. Let me explain the three. Active behavior coping.
And I'm told she's back online. We can hear her.
Okay.
Okay. Hello.
I'm asking, when you get a report about a terminal disease,
Yes.
then you go for that, then you become, you develop an anxiety all through the time. You feel like something on is going to happen.
Okay.
Next, what are you going to do?
Okay. Thank you so much. I think I heard her.
I didn't get that.
She's saying what happens when you're anxious throughout and you're always cautious that something is going to happen. How do you address that? The anxiety.
Yes. I was able to talk about that anxiety. It's part of what I'm discussing. But let's distinguish between depression and anxiety. Depression, you are filled with what you call sadness, and you feel like you have no interest in anything. You tend to be involved in avoidance of the topic, and you tend to feel like life has come to a standstill, such that things that you used to enjoy, sleep, and other things become interfered with. Anxiety, on the other hand, you become hyper at this particular situation. You start getting worried. You start becoming, experience things like palpitation, which is in the body. You start feeling agitated. You start feeling things are going to be worse. And I think that's what she's talking about.
Yes.
Sometimes anxiety is accompanied by negative thoughts, where you feel like, since we lost this person, we are likely to lose somebody else. And you become so preoccupied in avoiding another death in the family. such that you even feel like, don't need to go to work, I need to hang around with the children, just in case they die if I go away. Or I don't need to drive a car again, just in case I die if I drive. So those thoughts tend to come. And when you actually do it, then you find yourself feeling uncomfortable, you are sweating, you are restless, and you wonder what you need to do. That is what you call anxiety. And that will interfere with your sleep, will interfere with the way you do things. Now, the best way to do the anxiety, number one, is to identify what is the cause of anxiety. That is important. She needs to do that. And the second thing, once you identify the cause of the anxiety, then you go through what you call cognitive restructuring. In other words, challenging these thoughts that are sustaining the anxiety. If I feel that probably going to work or getting to a car, I will die like I lost my dad, then ask yourself, is it really possible to stay without entering a car, whichever direction? Can I really prevent it? So we talk about confronting the negative thoughts that are sustaining the anxiety. And number three is trying to engage in behavior that does not sustain the anxiety. Because the more I avoid getting to a car, the more the anxiety is sustained. And how do you go about it? Sometimes it's a process we call systematic desensitization, whereby if you feel so afraid to get into the car simply because you are fearing to die, you may go with somebody who is very close to you so that he can prevent you or help you go through the process. And you can go 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. Then eventually you find you're able to go on your own. So you must be engaged in behavior that helps you not to sustain the anxiety. And number two is to challenge the thoughts and the ideas that are sustaining this negativity so that the anxiety level goes down. And the third one is to be involved in some relaxation exercises. What is it that we feel when you are anxious? Number one, palpitation. Number two, it's like we are going away. Number three, restlessness. Can we train these people to learn to be restful? Can you train these people to learn to control their breathing system so that this feeling that the heart is coming out or another thing is likely to happen? So we manage the body. Because when anxiety is happening, the body, through what you call the adrenaline system, which is discharged from the kidneys, it goes in up to the head, the pituitary comes to the thyroxine, thyroid gland, then releases a lot of oxygen and oxygenate and gives the body enough glucose to be able, the body is prepared for fright or fear. So the body in a state. So you need to get involved in exercise that calms the body to deal with anxiety. And that's why in our treatment process, we use a system we call what you call relaxation exercise. We can either use a breathing relaxation. Sometimes you can use even others called neurolinguistic hypnosis, where people tend to calm themselves, learn to control themselves, so that when these provoking thoughts come, they can still learn to be calm. Through that process, they can become better. And you find out a thought that was provoking now a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear, whatever it is now comes down and the body is able to relax. So we teach what you call internal breathing relaxation exercises. The next thing we do is what we call physical exercises, because it also helps when you are engaged in some physical exercise. The other one is also thought control. In other words, when this thought comes, what do I do with it so that the reaction I'm experiencing? Okay. And that's why sometimes we experience people go to the gym, participate in these activities, do even the simple things you used to do in school, because the moment you do that, you calm the internal organs that tend to be activated, hyper-aroused by the particular thoughts that come to your mind.
And Doc, earlier on you had mentioned that one way of moving on from the loss of a loved one is seeing, maybe going and viewing the body and all that. But there's someone who is asking, since the father died about 10 years ago,
yes,
he's not able to view anybody. Maybe after loss of another loved one, he's not able to view anybody or to go and see or attend any burial ceremony. Is it a hindrance to him from moving on from the kind of grief or also loss that he is going through?
Basically, what this person is going through is he's avoiding any situation that can cause anxiety. Probably at the point where he went through the loss of this particular person, let's say the father, as you have mentioned, she was not able to cope with that. And so any experience that makes the person see the body or another person or visit that kind of thing will trigger the reaction similar to the one the loss of the dad she experienced during the loss of the dad or he experienced. So what does he do? He engages in a process we call avoidance. And avoidance does not solve the problem. avoidance tends to sustain the original fear he has. So this person will continue on like that, avoiding any situations that would remind or reenact the situation that happened earlier on when he lost a dear one, and continue like that. But what will happen one day, there will be a situation where she cannot be able to avoid that. And at that point, she will feel a bit disturbed, she will be feel comfortable. That's the time she will require help at that point if she's not able to cope. But some people may cope with it, and some people may not. So when you see somebody saying that I experienced this when I saw my dad or whatever I did, I don't want to see or to participate in another one. Basically what they are doing, they are sustaining avoidance because they do not want to go through an experience they went through. And they fear that going through this will trigger. The best way is to let them go through this process. They can start slowly, then they can feel up to where they are comfortable. If they are comfortable when they participate in a funeral, they only see the grief, that's fine. Then slowly by slowly, they will be able to overcome this reality. But anything that is causing anxiety, and you avoid it throughout, then the anxiety doesn't go. It means when time it will come, the anxiety will still come back.
Okay. And now, Doc, we have to wind up, but in point form, kindly just list for us what we need to do, how we need to take care of ourselves when we are grieving, just in point form.
All right.
Then you can also tell us where we can find you for more of the counseling.
Thank you very much. I think we would say this, that let's understand that loss and grief is a normal process. When we lose something dear to us or somebody dear to us. And that we should be able to understand. And when it happens, we may be faced with what we call denial. It is always important when you feel angry, when you feel you are not registering the reality, when you feel you are disturbed, talk to somebody. Because when you talk to somebody, you tend to release that which is in you that making me unable to face the reality. When we see our friends going through this, let's not condemn them. Let's be there for them. Sometimes in life, we remember people who walked with us the journey of grief than those people who even sent the money and never did anything. There are people who are there. What we need is a human being able to understand what we are going through. So the best thing is to understand we can go through this. Number two, if you feel this, whatever loss I've gone through is interfering with the normal functioning after I've gone through the loss, the best thing is to talk to somebody, look for professional help. And that's why we are in clinics where people can come in and we can help them cope with this problem. Because if we don't, it becomes a problem. And if you feel the loss, if you feel like we want to grieve, we want to cry, let's not suppress it so that we look gentlemen and gentlewomen. Okay. Let us face the feeling we have. And that is the best way to deal with it. And when the symptoms become so profound that interferes with your normal function, please look for professional help. Look for professional help. You ask for me to tell them where they can get us. Yeah. We have our clinics in Nairobi. We are located in High Ridge. That is next to Aga Khan Hospital, Parklands, and our telephone numbers for those who would like to come to our clinic or who require help is 0721 361616. I repeat again, 0721 361616. We are located at Amani Plaza, Parklands, 3rd Parklands Avenue, next, just after Aga Khan Hospital. Okay. We can always be there to assist.
Dr. Stephen Wahome, thank you so much for coming to our show today. It was really helpful. I've learned a lot personally. And all you need to understand, as the doctor says, is that loss and grief is very normal. Talk to someone, accept, and also do not condemn. My doctor show continues tomorrow. Thank you so much for keeping us company. My name is Purity Museo. Have a good day.